I have only 3 points from the book, and then I will elaborate a bit, then we go into Q&A. In this book, the key point I try to make is that we should see Malaysia in 3 middles. The first middle, Malaysia should aspire, or we are already almost there, but we should aspire to be the indispensable middle of the supply chain. That means we accept that we are not going to be the top technology nation, but we are the indispensable middle. Without us, a lot of things cannot be made. We want to fortify that particular positioning in the supply chain. Second point is that we want to see that Malaysia is a middle power, and Malaysia is also a middle ground when it comes to geoeconomics. We want to see that Malaysia is an aspiring middle power in geopolitical sense, but also we are middle power and middle ground in geoeconomics. The world is going to be a very difficult place, especially in production, in economics. The world used to imagine that it is one single supply chain. From the fall of Berlin Wall in November 1989 up until the first Trump administration and until COVID, the world imagined, or the general consensus of the world is that it's called just in time. You can move container boxes anywhere as you wish. There was no factoring of any crisis and any risk. But now we know the world is full of risks. The world now knows that it has to deal with pandemic and of course many other health crises. The health crisis can come in the form of aging, it can come in the form of the next pandemic, COVID-26, COVID-27, but we now know that there is health risk. Second, the world now recognizes that there are multiple financial challenges. We have high interest rate within a short span of time, suddenly from almost zero interest rate to 5.5 in the US, and that has a global impact on debt and also on the financial resources and fiscal space of developing country. Oil price can go yo-yo, and there are also multiple financial crises. And among our neighborhood, Sri Lanka had almost what they call default. Sri Lanka had a default, Bangladesh almost had a default, Pakistan almost had a default. And there are also other many challenges, financial crisis. And then the world is also dealing with geopolitical crisis, right? The war in European continent, the war in Gaza, and in Southeast Asia there are multiple challenges. The Korean Peninsula, the Taiwan Strait, and South China Sea. I mean, we can elaborate more later. And the world is also dealing with climate crisis. So risks become so important, and why we want to aspire to be a middle ground and also a middle power, middle ground in production, because we do not want the world to bifurcate. US wants to have a US production system. China wants to have a China production system. They want to cut off from each other, particularly US now wants to cut off itself from the other supply chain. We want to avoid that. We want to avoid the bifurcation of supply chain, and we want to see ourselves as a middle ground, so that we can still work with the US and we can still work with China, but we also work with everyone else, EU and all other developing countries. The third point is we want to see Malaysia as a middle class society. Now, why I say middle class is so important, I mean, we discussed this in all our previous terms and previous cohort, with all the previous cohort, and in my books I talk a lot about the importance of creating a middle class. Why? If your people are not rich, you may run into trouble. Why? Previously, Asian society, starting from Japan in the 1950s, after that 1960s, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, the four dragons, and then subsequently followed by Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines, the four tiger cubs, and followed by Vietnam, followed by China. All this society grew rich, become richer by exporting to the US. Right? We suppress wages, we dismantle unions, we do all sorts of things in order to export to the US, to suppress, so that we become competitive in cost. But now US is warring itself up. US say, don't come to export to me. Don't send your products to me. Come to build factory here, but don't export to me. You have bilateral trade surplus against the US, I'm going to come after you. That is what Trump is saying. So don't export to US. Where are we going to sell our products? If we cannot export to the US, where are we going to sell our products? We may run into trouble. No. So it is important that we also have a rich middle class among ourselves, so that the middle class at least can consume some of the products we produce. But beyond that, we also want to see ASEAN becoming a middle class. Think about this. When China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, China had only 100 million middle class. But today, 25 years later, by any measurement, China at least has 400 million middle class. The middle class itself generates domestic consumption, and that consumes a lot of the products. But of course, China is another problem with a lot of challenges. But now in Southeast Asia, we have 680 million population. Imagine that in 20 years' time, by 2045, ASEAN has, let's say, 800 million population. If out of the 800 million population, 400 million are considered middle class, ASEAN will be like the China market now. ASEAN will be like the EU market now. But to move to that direction, we need to make sure that our people become richer. Our people get higher salary, our people become richer, our people can actually afford to buy more things. But to do so, we need to change the way we see things. So I leave it there, the three middles: indispensable middle in the supply chain, middle power and middle ground, middle power in geopolitics, middle ground in economics, and trying to create a middle class in Malaysia and ASEAN. So that is my kerangka, my overall framework, and let's open up for conversation. We can chat as long as you wish, and let's have an open two-way conversation. Thank you very much. By the way, I also want to thank Dato' Johnny Lim. When I was Deputy Minister, I visited his where he was, and then been long associated with him, and I'm very proud to see him again. Thank you.